Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Word up. First, we got to start with a little bit of levity. So Pedro, I met him when I was at Berkeley. He was like king of Berkeley at the time. And I was in high school. I showed up there in 1989, and everybody was like, yo, this dude Pedro is here. He's the king of Berkeley, first of his name, protector of all the people. And I was like, this is dope. But then you could imagine a brother like him with that voice at 20 years old, really? Killing it. I was like, okay. So there have been a number of intersections through my own development with Pedro. So I did engineering at Berkeley. It seems like everybody here is kind of Pedro's friends. And I also just got this clue, like if you want to have a dope conference with a lot of people, just make everybody talk. And so like everybody will come because your name is on the agenda. And then you got to be Pedro's boy and it'll just all show up. So what was interesting to me about these intersections though was I did engineering at Cal. So I came from New York, also following, and did mechanical engineering. And in those days, it was like social justice happened on the south side and math homework happened on the north side. And so we have a number of Cal alum over here who I'm meeting now for the first time, like, yo, I didn't even know that you were there because I was just hemmed up with the north side kids doing my math homework. And what was interesting about it, though, was that the sense of justice that was born at that time was explicit, coming out of the student kind of corpus at that time on the south side of campus. And I would distinguish the south and north because it matters, and I think it's relevant to this conversation that we're going to have. At the south side, because the nature of the work that they were actually studying was relevant to the social contract with the country, they were clearly more engaged. It was part of their homework assignments. But our education was essentially stripped of all of that. I didn't really have to do any of those things. And so we're over here doing differential equations and tensor calculus, et cetera, and so we were being trained, and I felt that they were being educated. And so the distinction, even at the most elite levels, was clear to me then. And so what the circle of this part of it was that they had these soldiers, who Pedro among them, was kind of an example of what this other kind of existence would be. But for those of us who ended up being byproducts of the kind of work that we're talking about now, it took me a minute to orient myself to the implications of the kind of education that I had and its relevance to social justice. So to that extent, I want to begin with where I'm going to end. I think that there is a fundamental distinction that we are in danger of missing in the distinction between education and training. I think we're caught up in this kind of STEM nomenclature and the coding and all of the fancy words that we use around it. And to the extent that those things are applicable to our people, it's training. We're conforming them. I went to the last class yesterday, which was dope. I was like, yo, like being a man in the Obama era is just kind of deflating. You know what I mean? Like they got this stature of people like, I just can only be second. And then, so in this class yesterday, one of the things that Pedro gave, I think it's education policy. And as a summative comment, what he was saying is that there are two kinds of education. One is the kind that's just training people to get jobs. And there, the objective is to make these students be conformists. The other is to be critical of the system that they're trying to conform into. Those are two different kinds of education. It's question 2 on the final. I knocked it out last night. So what I think is at risk here is because of the inertia that we've put on following the puck relative to this hockey illusion that we had earlier, and the way that we're talking about jobs of the future in 21st century and the future of work and the STEM and the coding and all of that language, I think, is forcing us in times to miss that we're trying to train black and brown people and educate white kids. And therein lies, I think, part of the fundamental challenge that we're all facing. So let me just come back now to what I think is a part that's been missing, at least in my experience of the first half of this morning. The way that this conversation seems to me to have gone, I'm being just a bit responsive to what I heard earlier, is that we're talking about saving our communities. And in many instances, when we're talking about that in mixed company, we're like, don't come and save me, I don't need saving, I just need help, etc. But in many instances, we do actually need to be saved. We need to save ourselves, of course, we have to be a part of the conversation. But our communities in many instances are so broken that we're trying to make sure that we can even exist. that we can just be citizens, that we can be valuable. So we're looking for a human affirmation in an American context that hasn't yet seen the kind of disparities that we currently have when it was not illegal to make it so. So this is where we are at the moment. But what's part of that that's missing is this elite side of this dialogue. So a lot of the conversation has revolved around the tech sector and its influence and the way that it's influencing homelessness. That article was referenced quite a bit. But the way that that happens is because that tech sector and the wages associated with it are enabling a certain class of people to have a disproportionate amount of power in every city that they live in. It's historically unprecedented. And even in the robber baron era of the 20s, there weren't that many of them. So you had these couple families, after which whole cities are building their theater names on, but it was just a couple families. But this now, we're talking about thousands of people who have incomes north of $200,000 a year. So here's a relative stat, and you're going to have to bear with me. I'm just talking a story relative to what I heard this morning. A friend of mine is a faculty at Duke University. Sometimes these things need actual examples, so we're not statistics. His boy, his colleague, we're friends, let's just talk like we're family. So his boy, who's also on the faculty at Duke, his son is a sophomore at Duke and got a summer CS internship at a company that we shall not name. At that company, I know it well, he is getting $3,000 a month, a week. Yeah, you know what I mean? So I'm saying, that is a disproportionate amount of influence. This kid is 20. What the hell is he doing for $3,000 a week? So, in Atlanta public schools, where I'm from, the summer here, typically the summer is 8 weeks. It's an 8-week internship. $3,000 a week. $24,000 for a summer, right? In Atlanta public schools, we have 52,000 students. 77% of them are black. 12% are white, and we have some others. I'm not being casual about that, I'm just saying. The median household income of the black students in Atlanta public schools is $24,000 a year. The median household income of the relatively few white students is $164,000 a year. So this kid, who's 20 and is white, is making what the median household income is of black families in the entire city in a summer. And he's 20, and he still lives at home. So if we're thinking about the implications of what that means to the trajectory of that kid's life, relative to the 40-something thousand students who are in Atlanta public schools, herein lies this other part of this problem. And you're catching me in a little bit of the winter of my discontent right now. I am more often than not more optimistic, but right now I'm feeling a little beleaguered, so I was glad to come here and just kind of be in the conclave with the choir. We have, in the population of Atlanta in 2000 was 64% black people and 31% white people. In the census in 2010, we had one of the most precipitous switches of any American city. It went from 64% black to 52% black in 10 years. That was 30,000 people, black people, who left. That's about 8 black people every day who left the city to go live somewhere else. The city of Atlanta, not the metro area, the city of Atlanta. At the same time, coincident with that shift was the rise of the proportion of white people, 31 to 38. It was almost a one-to-one switch. So what does that mean? It's crass to talk about these things in public, but black people in Atlanta have a half-life. From 2000 to 2043, the population in 2043 of black people will be half of what it was in 2000. And it matters. LA doesn't really, California generally, I think y'all only like 7% black people, but we got a lot of black people in Atlanta. Atlanta is black people. It's the black Mecca. Think about it historically. So for that happens in an American southern city, the epicenter of the entire civil rights movement, the black community will be totally decimated in our lifetime. What attributes to that? So now I'm going to go back and forth between the thing that fires me up and some of the details about what we're talking about here. So again, with this coding thing and all that, I buy into it, I get it. The other part of what I do, as Pedro didn't allude to, I'm on the faculty at Georgia Tech. I run a center called the Constellations Center for Equity in Computing. And the point of that is our hypothesis is that with regards to computer science education, my colleagues here all know, colleagues and mentors, in fact, that if we don't have a structural artifact in the formal education system, the likelihood that the masses of our people are going to get to take advantage of it are nearly zero. So all of these things that we're doing as complements have to be organized as complements to what's happening in formal education, because we are totally dependent on the formal education system. There's no way around that. How we change it and make it mutable such that it suits our needs is a different conversation. But the reality is our kids go to public school. That's the deal. So then what happens? In that context, we have math. The way that we've kind of jargonized all of this computation and STEM and whatever, and notwithstanding what I do. I mean, I do it too. I can do it with the best of them. I got all the adjectives down. But the reality is that when you're in school and people are talking about your particular class and future of learning and future of work and whatever, and they're pushing all these colored kids into those classes, the white kids are just in math. It doesn't have a prefix. It's algebra, pre-algebra, algebra, trigonometry, geometry, calculus. It's clear. The words make sense. They've been around for 100 years. But when you're starting to do this other complicated computational mathematics for consumers and whatever, I'm like, I don't understand what that is. But the reason that I bring this up is to say that if you want to come to Georgia Tech, for example, we're sitting at UCLA. One of the things that UCLA and Google have in common, only 3% black people. This campus is dope, but we can't get in here. And it has perfume. It smells like jasmine and eucalyptus. I'm like, this place is beautiful. But I was sitting on the yard and I didn't see any black people. Actually, that's not true. I saw 8. 4 of them were in this cart and they were all basketball players and this white dude was driving around. I was like, yo, that must be nice. But the reality is, it's 3% black people at UCLA. And it's not disaggregated, so I couldn't tell how many are in the College of Engineering or how many are in computer science. The 3% that work at Google, if you separate it into the tech part, it's 1.2%. It's basically about 1,300 black people in the entire company that work in the tech component at Google. That's 100,000 people, the entire world. Google is a verb, and there are only 1,200 black people involved in that, in the entire world. So if I bring it back now to the formality of what I'm talking about, there's stages of this thing. So the way that we've had this conversation thus far, as I said, is about the structure and the viability of our community as a basic institution. How do we just make sure that the education works in service of living, in service of being viable? There's another part of this conversation, if we're just thinking about it as a spectrum. What is involved in getting into the elite strata of where the locus of power is that we're sitting here critiquing? If we're not participating in that part of it, we're ever dependent on the decisions being made on our behalf. As tech or non-tech, but being a part of that strata is essential to our having equitable representation in the power centers in the way that the industry and the country is going forward. So what does that mean? This is the thing with Georgia Tech now. If you want to come to tech, for example, it's the same here. If you want to come to tech and to do into the College of Computing, you have to have a 1550 on the SATs. 1,550, just to make sure everybody's straight. Out of 1,600. For those of you who were through the days when it went up to 24 and back down or whatever, 1,600, you got to have 1,550 if you want to come to the College of Computing, Georgia Tech. So we don't tell that out loud, so we don't want to discourage people, but that's the real deal. And I've also looked into what it takes to get into UCLA. It's the same thing. So if you start now thinking about who gets those kind of scores, really? I mean, we can gather up the whole black community in the entire United States and find the 450 of them or so that have better than 750 on the math SAT in the entire country. We could put them right here and have them in Pedro's class. So then, if you want to be able to get into tech, we don't even offer pre-calculus. As a structural matter, if you don't do it in your high school, you're done. You can't come to us. as a practical matter, if you don't do advanced placement BC calculus and do something on it, we're not really talking to you. So all this other stuff about, you did your coding thing in the summer and whatever, that's nice and it's important. It's necessary, but it's fundamentally insufficient to change the trajectory. There's no question, you can't play with us. And we can do the extension all that we want and be altruistic, but you really can't play. You just can't. The competition is too stiff. To that extent, let me add this other little caveat, which I think is missing. In the College of Computing at Georgia Tech, this pattern is equally true at Google. Between 2000 and we have roughly 2,600 undergraduates in the College of Computing. The only thing that has materially shifted demographically is that the proportion of Asian students has eclipsed the proportion of white students in 2017. The first time in the history of that institution ever where there were more Asian students than white students in the College of Computing. Last year, if you disaggregate and you took out the number of international Asian students as a separate category, the domestic Asian students superseded the white students themselves. And it's never going back. Those proportions are like this, the white kids are like that, and the rest of us are just kind of down here like noise at the bottom of the graph. If you want to be specific, we have 151 black students, 147 Hispanic students, 41 black women, like 37 black Hispanic women, and then everybody else is everybody else. In Atlanta, this is not LA. This is in Atlanta. In Georgia, the epicenter of the Black Belt between Southern Virginia and Eastern Texas. So then, what does that mean in terms of the context of what we're doing here? So one is a structural matter. And some of these things, I think, need some clear words. It's a structural matter. There's bias in this thing. The reason that this white thing is upsetting me is because it's being kind of glossed over. When we were talking merit talk in the early days about SATs, and we needed to make sure that we wanted to tell the world that SATs are not the adequate predictors of success in engineering, and blah, blah, we all know them sentences. And the counter-argument was what? It's a meritocratic system, and you people need to get your act together, and if you study for the test, you'll be fine. There is no systemic or intrinsic bias in the SAT. It's a meritocratic test. The whole point of standardization is to make sure that we all have equal opportunity, blah, blah, blah. Now the Asian kids are eating up the white kids. The white kids can't compete. So let's see about systemic response to that. University of Chicago said, we're good. We don't need the SAT anymore. Georgia Tech is like, in order to support diverse candidates, we might not consider SAT anymore. Really? What happened to all the arguments? What happened to the merit? What happened to all that? So there's a part of this that we're not really seeing. In the last 5 years at Google, the only fundamental thing that's happened, excuse me, relative to those diversity annual reports that we always see coming out of the New York Times, because they always get critiqued. Well, Google has this and that, and we went up from 1.2246% black people to 1.4228% black, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, it's all trivial. The thing that has happened that nobody writes about is that the proportion of white tech Googlers has dropped 10% in 5 years. The proportion of Asian tech Googlers has increased 9% in 5 years. We've been at this game forever, trying to get us in the game. Nothing's happened. But what's happened is that because of this structure that is supporting those who are most disciplined, most aggregating towards the just basic math. So now, this is the thing that's going to make you want to cut your throat. And I'm sorry. Then I'm going to get aspirational at the end. These things have sequences. You know how it goes. At the end will be aspirational. I wish I had Pedro's voice. You know what I mean? Don't you? You know what I mean? Whatever. I can run faster than you. That's why your hips don't work. So it's all good. So in Atlanta, if algebra is the thing, y'all familiar with Bob Moses, yes? Bob Moses is like, yo, if you can't do algebra, you can't play. He was right then, he's right now, he'll be right forever. Until this whole system changes fundamentally, that fact is true. If you don't do algebra in the 9th grade, you're done with regards to this tech stuff. And I'm narrowing it to that. I'm not saying that that doesn't mean that you can't aspire to other things. Please hear me. But relative to what we're talking about in this part of the strata that I'm talking about, algebra is your lifeblood in the 9th grade. In Atlanta, we have 2,963 black 9th graders who took Algebra 1. The end of course test. In Georgia, the Georgia part matters. As much as I live there, the standards in Georgia are ridiculous. But nevertheless, 2,963 black ninth graders took the Algebra 1 end of course test. 444 of them were proficient, and only 38 were distinguished. 38 out of 2,963. And if you don't do distinction, if you don't get distinction in the ninth grade in algebra, you can't play with us. There's no way you're done. You can't come to UCLA for damn sure. Georgia Tech, you're finished. 38 out of Atlanta public school system, of which Georgia Tech sits geographically in the middle of it. If you go to pre-algebra, 2,657 of them took the pre-algebra test. And in that one, like, we couldn't even do the pre-algebra. 300 and so got proficient. And when my own daughter, who's in the ninth grade in APS, she showed me this test, she herself was like, yo, I'm going to just let you know ahead of time you're going to be a little bit mad at what they're teaching our people. Because you can imagine the way I'm talking to you now, what our conversations are like at home. I'm saying. I'm just saying. So she was like, yo, you're going to be mad. I looked at this and I was like, you're kidding me. Really? I mean, when you get people who are talking about, so percent is like multiply in the ninth grade, them kind of questions? Really? So we don't have a structure that supports what we're doing. In fact, quite the opposite. We have a structure that's killing our people. And these teachers, bless their hearts, they don't have the aptitude for what we're talking about. So let me just wrap with this. When we're talking about this computing stuff and coding and CS education and so on and so forth, the federal policy has been, under the Obama administration, CS for all. He declared it as a national initiative. Back in the days when we had national initiatives that made sense. So, at that point, it made sense. We have to be able to develop an infrastructure for the instruction, the delivery of instruction for computing in American education across the board. The For All clause was hard fought, as you could well imagine. Just saying that was hard fought. But what does that mean in practice? It means that we have to somehow figure out how to get 50 million students who are in public education and the 3 million teachers who teach them some basic computational skills themselves to be able to deliver this thing. And if we go back to this analogy with the hockey puck, which I find hilarious with people who largely probably can't skate. Black and brown people don't skate. We don't go on no ice. But nevertheless, I get the sports metaphor. We're asking people to be able to do things that they're not trained to do. We would never expect an English teacher to go to professional development over the summer and somehow miraculously show up as a Spanish teacher in the fall. It would just be comical, like, here go your chuckles. But that is the logic of what we're doing. And it's not unreasonable. The reason that we're doing that is because there's no fiscal incentive for people with computer science skills to become computer science teachers in public schools in America today. Zero. I mean, I'm sitting in LA. Y'all were on strike just the other day. So we're asking people who are the most vulnerable professionally. They're fighting for their lives, literally. And we're asking them to take on this cognitive challenge that is not even close to trivial. So we're putting the burden of transforming this education on the people who I argue are the most stressed and likely the least able to facilitate what we're asking them to do. But the funding structures have followed that. Hundreds of millions of dollars are going into teacher professional development. And I'm not at all saying that that's ineffective. I know it's a necessary condition. But I just want to step back and look at the reality of the argument that we're actually making. Does it, in fact, make sense? At the logical end of this argument, are we going to get to the place that we're expecting to be? Especially when 38 of the black people in Atlanta public schools are the only ones who can do algebra. If we somehow miraculously think we're going to put computer science on top of a broken math infrastructure, we're kidding ourselves. Because people often use the argument that computing is so engaging, it has all these tools, we can put robots and we can do this and Raspberry Pi and blah, 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 blah. Okay, I get it. But if you can't do math, if your basic mathematical maturity is underdeveloped, there is no way you're going to be able to play at this other level. Keep in mind the part of the spectrum that I'm talking about. You can't come to these institutions without that kind of mathematical maturity. even to get into UCLA, the students who don't want to do engineering, they're killing the AP BC calculus exam in the 11th grade too, to come and study English. You know what I mean? So if we're thinking about this in the context of where we really are, a couple things, and then I'm done. This thing really gets me angry. Because right now, I'm not exactly sure how to win. But one is we have to be clear about the language. The language matters. Atlanta is the second most segregated city in the United States. And they're always talking about black people and brown people, whatever. White people in Atlanta don't want to be with black people. They move. As soon as we show up, they're gone. I'm like, yo, but I'm nice. Get to know me, you know what I mean? But we can see it in the school choice patterns. I mean, this is the College of Education, so everybody, the demographers here will tell you exactly how this works. But I've just seen it myself. I also know that the segregation in my daughter's school is such that she has an integrated school, but in the International Baccalaureate program, and in the AP classes, and in the honors classes, somehow miraculously all the white kids got the memo, and that's where they all are. All of them are in that program. Her school has 1,241 students, 151 white students, all of them. Every single one is in the IB program. I'm like, yo, y'all ain't got no special needs kids? You know what I mean? Like nobody? Really? It doesn't even make sense. On its face, it doesn't make sense. So that's somebody's decision. Somebody decided we're going to put all these kids together in the high-end part of this program, and the rest of y'all, good luck and Godspeed. Let's say some things out loud. Then we have this other challenge with the way that we're codifying these particular classes. And here's where I think is relevant to us. Like when we're talking about where in the spectrum we are, we just need to be clear. If we're talking about trying to get students to just survive and win and graduate, okay, let's be clear that that's the objective. And the nomenclature around that has to be specific. But if we're talking about getting people to play at this other level, that's a different kind of nomenclature. It's a different set of skills. It's a different kind of trajectory. It's a different kind of funding mechanism that's necessary to enable that to happen. That part of it, I argue, is being neglected. Lastly, provided that we have some clarity on the way that we're going to talk about these things, which is essential. And all these fancy words, I'm part of the fancy circle too. I went to Berkeley, I'm fancy, you know what I mean? Like for real. I was in Nairobi the other day and I got these fancy boots and I was like, yo, the sidewalk is muddy, I'm good. Like, hello Africa, but I'm gonna see you from the hotel. So, just a joke. Work with me, y'all, come on. So, anyway, just to lighten the mood because I'm really mad. So, the other is the nomenclature needs to be specific. Where in the spectrum are we actually operating? Who are the particular students that we're talking about, and what are the surrounding set of needs that enable the things that we're actually after? Point 2 of Pedro's presentation yesterday was what's the relationship or the dissonance between federal and state policy and what actually happens in individual schools. The number one answer, which the students didn't give, but I would have had it in the second try. The number one answer was that they don't really they're not incorporating the surrounding set of complementary complexities that are causing what the students are doing in the school. So the policies don't account for that, so therefore they're ineffective. I thought that was profound. Lastly, the collective agency part of all of this is central. It's clear that this problem is the kind, when you present it out loud, I mean, it's overwhelming. It makes it feel like there's a sense of paralysis, like what the hell are we gonna do? There has never been a moment in American history where this wasn't legalized, where we've had this extraordinary wealth gap fueled by the complements of what race and its kind of insidious factors do, and are expecting a public institution like education to fix it. We've never had that. It's unprecedented in American history. And that kind of thing can be overwhelming. Therefore, it's essential that we think about what this context means in terms of a collective agenda. And I would argue that specificity matters. Being clear on where in the spectrum you're talking about, what the specific goals of that part of the spectrum are, the policy infrastructure of that lane versus another. And doing one does not somehow invalidate your black card or your Hispanic card or your Latinx card because you're not focused on the other. The only way for us all to win is to be specific and successful in the sections and lanes in which we're trying to win. And then we'll collectively win together. That sounds like a good place to start. That's aspirational. Boom.